Thank you, Annie, and very happy to be here in this interesting conference. Yeah, so a little bit about myself. I've been working in telecommunications operator for more than 16 years, specifically in Telefonica. Been almost always in those 16 years responsible for AI, big data, and analytics. uh, commercial activities. The last 5 to 8 years, I've more worked on the social impact of AI, leading the implementation of the responsible use of AI across Telefonica Group. And since I left, I'm now active in several NGOs, nonprofits that work on AI and big data for social purposes like displaced peoples, climate change, and also on the ethical, assuring the ethical and responsible use of artificial intelligence in society, governments, and companies.
Okay, so at least initially, let's concentrate on looking at AIs and especially generative AIs and telcos. And I was thinking that maybe one of the biggest issues about the culture and the organization of telcos around that would be whether or not they develop their own AI language models or whether they use somebody else's. Do you agree with that, Richard, or do you think I've got that wrong?
Yes. Okay, so indeed, uh, Gen AI is a huge opportunity for any business. Yeah. So also for telcos. And this space is moving very quickly, yeah, as we just heard
Mm.
before as well. So uh, should um, should telcos develop their own generative AI, large language models, yeah, for taking advantage of this opportunity? My short answer is no. Yeah? I think there is a huge amount of LLMs and large language models available that can be perfectly used by telecommunication operators and any business around the world. Um, consider it something like the cloud. Yeah, so all telcos are using the cloud somewhere. Yeah, and it happen to be mostly three different providers, but only
Mhm.
three. Yeah, and they're all in the same country. So I envision something similar will happen with generative AI, that most of the companies across the world will use those services on the cloud. That doesn't mean that they can be profitable or innovative, etc. But because they will run it on top of that. Yeah. Um, it's very hard for an individual organization to keep the pace, yeah, with those big companies that invest a huge amount of money in this technology. Um, so if a telco wants to do that, uh, uh, to build such a model by themselves, they need to be aware that they need a huge amount of resources, a huge amount of skills to be better. Yeah, otherwise you have your own language model, but it's worse in all aspects, security, safeguarding, costs, etc., compared to others. There might be strategic reasons, national security reasons, why
Mm.
telcos might do that, but that's actually a different question. So I would say for business reasons, there is no reason to use your own, to build your own and invest in your own large language model at the moment.
Okay, and as a kind of furthering of that argument, I mean, would it be true to say that it's the data that the telcos used to train the models, and where they get to from that training that's the real value to them anyway, and that's their kind of unique gain?
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at generative AI, yeah, um, then basically, if you use it off the shelf, like the big players,
Mm.
which maybe there are 10, yeah, in the world today, they are all pre-trained, yeah, with a huge amount of information available on the internet, yeah, and so much information and so much training that actually the result is very good, yeah, in most of the contexts. Now, what what any company in the sector or telcos also need to do is to adapt, yeah, that model to their specific sector, yeah. And so you, instead of building your own model from scratch around your sector, it's much more economic and fast, and actually faster, uh, to take an existing model and then apply your own data slash documents to train that for your specific case. Yeah. Now there are three approaches to do that. Yeah. And I will list them in terms of from lower effort and investment to more effort and investment. Yeah. The first one is extended prompting. Yeah. Today, rather than putting just a simple query in a Gen AI, as we know it, like OpenAI's ChatGPT, of course, this all works with APIs, but you can use a huge prompt. Yeah, you can put everything. You can, if you want to give a tool for your people in your call center to be quicker in understanding how they have to respond to the customers, you could add in the prompt a lot of documents about what those customers agents have to know. And then in that prompt, if agents ask a question to the system, it will take all that into account and give it in as an answer. Eh? That is just, you don't have to do any effort. You just have to make a larger prompt. Yeah. Of course, prompting comes with a cost. The larger the prompt, the more you pay. So there is the trade-off between the things. But in terms of development and testing, it's a very good approach. Yeah? The second one is using what they call retrieval augmented generation, so-called RAG. Yeah? And then you take all the documentation of a telco, let's say again, around the customer call center, all the manuals they have to study, all the products that are available, all the tariffs and the rates, etc. And then you apply the technology, which means that you put it in chunks, you generate these mathematical models for the chunks, and when there is a question from an operator, then it matches the question of this operator with mathematics to all the fragments that has been treated before, and then the generative AI model, the general one, puts that all together in a coherent conversation and response. Yeah, so it requires a bit more development, but still it's relatively easy. And the advantage is that hallucinations are enormously reduced. Yeah, because you tell this large language model, if you answer a question of a user, in this case a call center agent, this is what you have to answer them. You can select it from these documents. Yeah? It doesn't go anywhere and predict whatever content which has a risk of hallucinations. Even though, so the Gen AI motor still puts everything together, and usually it's correct, but it can be incorrect. So the risk of hallucinations is not gone. Yeah? And the last approach is to fine-tune a large model that exists with your own documentation. That's an approach that many companies do. That requires development, and it requires some costs because you take a large language model, you take 30,000 of your documents, of your business, or 100,000, and you feed it in the model, and it retrains. So the weights in the model are a bit adjusted, yeah, to your specific domain. Yeah? And you do that once, and then you can use it. So these are different approaches. Companies have to experiment which is better, yeah? But shouldn't forget that the extended prompting is the best way to start and to test.
Okay, so really it's trial and experimentation to get the best outcome for any particular organization and a particular use case or set of use cases. Okay. I'm just wondering as well if you've any comments, Richard. We talked a little bit about very specific things for a particular industry, and everybody's got things that are special to their sector. And what do you think about, for those things, about the use of small language models? Do you think they have a value, bearing in mind what you've just said about how you can tune the kind of generic ones?
Yeah. So small language models, so they call them large language model, yeah, because they have billions and billions
They've
of
sucked up
parameters.
everything,
Yeah.
yeah.
And they take months to train, yeah, and they have a huge cost also in energy consumption because this is big data centers, etc. Now, small language models are still huge, yeah. So you go, so a large language can have from a north of 200 billion parameters. A small language model only has 4 billion, yeah, in that order. So it's still a huge amount that we cannot even imagine what it means. But in terms of consumption and in terms of energy and resources needed, and the cost of development is much cheaper. Yeah. Of course, they are limited in their scope. Yeah? So you can train it on a specific sector, on a specific domain. But if you do that as a company, as a telco, you still need a huge amount of skills, people, resources, etc. Because it's still an important thing to do. Yeah. But if you are able to do it, then you could go for it and it works. However, there are already a lot of small language models available. Yeah? So even the big players who have these large language models, they're also developing their SMLs for customers who have less resources, and maybe they need to run it on their side, have the ability to do. Yeah. So again, small language models. Think about DeepSeek. Yeah, it was a kind of revolution. So you don't need so much investment to come up with the same performance, and that's a trend that is happening. Yeah. So before you decide to build one yourself, also look around which SMLs are there. And I think it is a trend with any new technology. So in beginning, technology is big and expensive. Look at our first mobile phones. Yeah, they were big and they were
I
expensive.
remember it well. Yeah.
Yeah, look at what they have been later. Look at the chips. Yeah, so Moore's law. They're smaller and smaller and smaller, cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So with large language models, I think also now they are big and expensive, but over time we learn how to make them smaller and cheaper. Yeah, so that's the risk of now. If you invest in technology today, in 6 months, it may be obsolete. Yeah, so therefore you can do it, but you have to be very sure that you have all the resources to keep up with all the changes coming.
Okay, so that brings me nicely to my next question, really. And I'm wondering, what's the impact of all this on telco's organization and culture? Do you think it's having a profound effect?
Um, well, there's two ways. Yeah. So if you use generative AI, there are two ways companies use that. One is in a traditional way as a use case to solve a problem. Let's say if we want to give a tool to my customer call center operators, or even I want to have a channel where my customers, externally facing customer, can directly talk to me, then that's a use case. Yeah. Like any use case that telcos has in the past, like predictive maintenance or like a churn prediction or propensity models. So it's a use case and you have to develop it and deploy it, etc. So there is no difference in culture in the organization, yeah, because that's very well, it's the same as before. Even though it's a different technology, different use cases, the way large organizations deal with them is already okay, as far apart from the skills, yeah, they need for this. But the difference with Gen AI is that it can empower any single employee, yeah, in becoming more productive, faster, being able to do more things, etc. So, and that is a cultural difference, yeah? Because people used to, if they may have the proposal or analyze a request or write a lot of emails, all that can now be empowered with generative AI to such an extent that if you spend some time on learning how to do it, I mean, 80% of what you usually do, you can use this to help you to be more productive. Yeah. Now, I think that is a cultural change that needs to be accompanied by certain awareness and training. Yeah, because these are very powerful tools and with lots of opportunities, but also with some risks. Yeah. So what in my experience, what is important to have a kind of guidelines for employees in how to use this thing, and even better, yeah, if there is a specific training. Yeah, of course there are many people trained with this, but this is for everybody. Yeah, so one of the things that people need to take into account, if you use a public accessible Gen AI system, yeah, like Gemini, OpenAI, etc., beware of confidential information, yeah, because you're sharing your information outside the company. Now, if you have an agreement with a big provider to have your specific tenant, of course, you don't have that problem, but that depends, yeah, on where you are as an organization. Secondly, private and personal information. Be very careful by sharing that, because if you have a proposal with names in it, you use it, you are sharing personal information, which you actually should not. Yeah? So, and that doesn't matter where you share it with. If you have no consent, you should not be able to do that. Another thing is transparency, in the sense of, if you write a document that is 90% written by generative AI, and you distribute that, yeah, to people, then I think it is good to be transparent about it. So make a note: this document has been generated with the help of, and then you put whatever system you use. So the readers of that, as long as they are humans, yeah, they can see, okay, this document has been used. Yeah. Oftentimes I get so when we look at documents and we have people review documents, they say, this looks like part of it has been generated by ChatGPT, because I recognize the style, or sometimes I forget to delete the prompt. And that creates a very bad impression, because you pretend you wrote it yourself, but actually it was in large part written. Yeah? So if you be transparent about that, even if you forget a part of the prompt, people can expect that, yeah, and they won't treat it better. And very important, accountability. Yeah? So in the end, you are always accountable as a person for what you send out, even if it's 100% generated with Gen AI. Yeah. So beware. You can never say, "Oh, sorry, yeah, it was written by, so it's not my fault." It's always your fault if something goes wrong, because you're accountable. And employees in general need to know that, need to be aware of that, and how to handle that. And then finally, there is also an ethical point and an impact point, uh, um, because on the one hand, there might be a lot of bias in this model. Yeah, I probably have heard it in the conference. These models are statistical models. They learn from existing content, a huge amount of content, and what we see in normal content, there are lots of biases, gender biases or color bias, that are expressed in language. So if the system generates things, then it might be biased towards those things. So it might say that all certain people are male, or etc. Yeah, so you have to be aware of that. So do a kind read through what the system generates, and check whether there are those bias elements. And then if you detect them, remove them, rather than just sending out everything as it comes back. Also, you have to check the facts, because generative AI, as the word says, generates information rather than retrieves information. Now, that means that oftentimes they are in sync, but sometimes, and that's where the hallucinations come, it generates things that could be true, but actually are not true. So you also have to check that, and you have to take accountability for that. And there's one last social impact that not many people mention, but there definitely is an impact, and it is over time. If you delegate all the tough thinking, yeah, to machines, then over time we lose competencies and faculties. Yeah.
And originality.
Originality as well, because yeah, it becomes the
You're
large
just
majority
looking at the
statistic.
same old stuff, if you like. Yeah.
But taking, so think about this. If you receive large documents, and your company says, okay, make an analysis of this and come up with a document that we can distribute. And before that, it took you maybe 3 days to read documents, analyze, write things down, rewrite, structure, restructure. That is a real intelligent effort, yeah? That is good for your brains. Now, if you don't do that for 15 years, imagine then, in the end, you become lazy, yeah? Think about mobile phone numbers, yeah? Or phone numbers. Do you remember any phone numbers of people you are close with of the last
The
50
only
years?
mobile phone number I know is mine, and I've had it 30 years.
Yeah, and you know the phone numbers you used to have in your house like 30
Oh,
years
yeah, yeah,
ago, yeah?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we've kind of externalized or outsourced that task to a machine. And by doing that over 15, or no, actually 25 years, we're losing the faculty to do that, yeah? So actually, if you now have to remember a number, you really have to study, and all kinds of hints to remember it. So, and then, I mean, so this is very important also. If we use this in our daily lives all the time, then in the end we get used to be for by this help. And then as a team, machine, person, we grow. But as a person, maybe, yeah, we have to do an extra effort to keep our brains active. Yeah. And that is what I call the job of the future. One of the jobs of the future will to run a mental fitness center, because people in the past, people worked hard, labor, and they didn't need anything to keep in shape because
Fit,
work
yeah,
was hard.
yeah.
Today, everybody goes to the gym because nobody moves. It sits all day behind the desk, working with the computer. So they go to a fitness, they run because they need their bodies to keep in shape, yeah, for health reasons. Now, the same probably will happen with our minds. So we need to go to certain areas to keep our minds active. Otherwise, yeah, we will degenerate in the future.
Okay, you heard it here first, the brain gym. Um, on a more prosaic level, Richard, I'm going to think a lot about that. It's interesting. Um, you mentioned accountability in the middle of there, so and I think that's a really critical area. So let's talk a little bit about using AI responsibly and how telcos are looking to do that. And one of the issues is that maybe there's a tension between those arguing for regulation versus innovation. And I think some people seem to think that if you've got innovation, it's strangle, you can't have regulation. And if you've got regulation, it's going to really dampen, to inhibit um, innovation. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, very, very good question. I'm very pleased to say that actually the telecommunications industry is leading in terms of responsible use of AI. I don't know if you know about the GSMA that a few months ago launched the Responsible AI Maturity Model, which is published on the GSMA's website with a lot of input from operators, yeah? Also Telefonica from when I still was there. And that is a 5-level maturity model where there are questions. And so it's a kind of questionnaire. And if you ask the question, then it places you somewhere in this maturity model with recommendations how you can move on from one level to another level. The highest level, for instance, requires that there is a governance model in place with roles and functionalities, that all AI systems are registered, analyzed for risks. There is publicly the ethical principles are announced, the annual report reports about those kinds of things, and there are external auditors who check periodically that. So that's the highest level. The lowest level is that you haven't done anything. Maybe you have thought about something and things are happening in some places of your company, but not in a structured way. Yeah. So I think many telcos already have adopted that and are doing that. So telcos are in a very good place. GSMA has a reach to all of them. So it's a huge opportunity for this industry to be first an early adopter in that space. Now, if you want to be responsible with AI, a very high level nutshell, it means that you need to do training and awareness for your employees, what it means to be responsible. Yeah, that can include regulation, or it can be self-regulation, or it can be international recommendations like OECD or UNESCO or the Council of Europe, or well, many international recommendations are out there. For each system, you have to ask the right questions about potential impact, ethical, social impact on human rights, etc. So not the typical business questions, but the impact questions. You need a governance model. You need roles. You need responsibilities. You need a RACI model, that who is being responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And you need some technical tools that help you. Yeah? If the requirement is you should have quality model, or there should not be bias in your data, well, how can you find it out? Yeah, so you need some technologies to help you doing that. Yeah, so that's what it requires to be responsible with AI. Now, on your question about the trade-off between regulation, being responsible, and innovation, I think that's largely yeah, um, an overhyped discussion that is used anywhere at any occasion without a lot of depth. Yeah. So let me explain that. I think there are many business benefits for being responsible with AI. Yeah. First one is that investors require it more and more. They demand it. So if you look at ESG, yeah, environment, social, and governance, the E is about climate change. Now, there are many investors that before investing in a telco company, they look at their E rating. How are they doing with climate? Are they having plans in place to reduce emissions? Are they have a plan to reach, etc.? And they look at them. If they have companies of similar performance, ones that is doing better on environment, they will get the investment versus the other. So it's not only about doing good, being responsible. This is about business. And the same, so responsible AI is not in the E, but is in the S, in the social. Yeah. So, and I remember when I was at Telefonica, there were certain analysts who already started asking about this. Yeah. And that is going increasing and increasing. Now, of course, we are in a geopolitical situation where there is a very strong push against any regulation, even for climate. So I think self-regulation in this respect is even becoming more important in the coming years, even though I think regulation will catch up later again. Yeah. So the first reason why it's good for business, because it ensures your long-term investors. Second, also employees and customers demand more and more responsible behavior of companies, not only going for economic profits, but also thinking about the impact of the company in society and in the environment. Yeah? Now, there were some studies that say that over 65% of employees look at those things, and especially if we think about AI and data, there is a enormous competition for talent. Yeah? Very hard to get the right talent to build your and to use this technology. Now, a lot of those people, they care a lot about responsibility. Yeah? So if you have a responsible statement, you can attract and retain this talent, and also you can have your customers more relaxed, yeah, in their being able to buy your product. Yeah, think just about the things that's happening with a certain car, yeah, electric car built in the US, and all kinds of stickers are appearing that sorry that I have this car, but I bought it before this happened. So customers do mind, yeah, and we've seen it also in the sales of this specific car. So society demands it more and more. It's not saying that they demand only that, they also demand profitability, but it is a trend, yeah. And then if you think about responsible AI, which means that in the whole process of designing a product, buying it, thinking about it, developing it, bringing it to the market, if you start thinking about potential impacts that could harm you and people, if you find it, if you detect it early on, mitigation and prevention is very cheap and quick. Whereas if you launch something as quick as possible into the market, and then you see, oh, there's a huge
Flaw, yeah.
oh, something that we didn't think about, then getting that product out of the market, reputational damage, talking to customers. If it's physical, you have to get it back. So it's much more expensive. Yeah. So there is also a business case in terms of economics and being faster and cheaper of going through the market. Yeah. Try to yeah. It's not only business. You have to think other things also in into account. And then there is a large reason why actually being responsible increases innovation. Yeah. So if you have a governance model, you have things in place that detect potential problems early on, and there is a system in place that can do that with roles, responsibilities, etc. That means that some companies start to innovate more and faster, because persons might think, oh, I have to be very careful with what I do with this AI because maybe I'm doing something wrong and then the company has a problem. But if you have this safety net, yeah, and people feel safe, so actually because they feel safe, It's like a sandbox. Yeah, they feel safe. They can experiment because they know if they do something they shouldn't, somebody, yeah, will catch it, and that actually drives innovation in the culture of information, because people feel a secure place where they can innovate. So these are all reasons why uh, regulation and responsibility is not against innovation, but it allows innovating in a responsible way. Yeah? Now, if we speak about regulation innovation, I think it's almost a geopolitical discussion, yeah, where
Yeah, to
some
some
regions,
extent.
yeah,
Mm.
and I think for a normal company, that doesn't matter. This is just about the big tech in the world. Yeah, so it's a world competition, like we had in the cloud. Yeah, so the cloud now is completely taken by the US. Yeah, the three
Mm.
providers, everybody is using them. Some people don't like it. It's a frustration for Europe, but hey, this is what it is. Let's get over it, and let's continue to do business. Yeah. Now, there might still be
Good.
a.
We're
Yeah,
getting short of time, I'm sad to say.
sorry.
So, could I ask maybe as our last question, and we've also got one question from the audience that you may or may not be able to answer, I don't know. But I'm just wondering, because this is a huge topic for telcos in their transition to techco, I'm wondering how big a role automation can play with the deployment of AI, the safe deployment of AI.
Yeah. Well, that's actually one of the things I didn't tell at the beginning. Yeah. So what I've seen in let's say in the GSMA and in many telcos, including Telefonica, this ethical thinking is very positive. Yeah. But it is true, you have to do some steps. Yeah. So you have to think about what is your system doing. You have to do a risk assessment. You have to have requirements. And with that learning that it's a kind of a burden to do that. It's not that companies don't like thinking in this way, but what they don't like is all the hassle around it, the documentation and the filling in questionnaires like you do with security and privacy impact assessment. So what learning from that, what we've done is we set up a new company that actually automates this whole process. Yeah, so it automatically finds out what is the purpose of the system, what types of data, what type of AI it uses. Then it does automatically a risk assessment, of course, with human oversight. It depending on the risk, it gives the requirement, and then it tells you how to mitigate the risk with the requirements, etc. And all that you can automate in the platform. So it moves you from doing such an analysis that may take you a few weeks with experts to really like 1 hour. Yeah? And that means automation is very important in sense. But if you look at it from another perspective, it's just a different use case for generative AI. Yeah? So you use generative AI to automate this process, which also has its risk. So you have to analyze those risks, etc. But that is why automation can be very important, as long as you keep an adequate human oversight in the loop.
Okay, and we have one question from
Go.
one of our audience who asks, and I don't know how answerable this is because it's a huge question. What are the operational cost, computation, and energy consumption impacts of integrating Gen AI, RAGs, etc.? I mean, that says to me we could probably talk about that all day, but I don't know if you've got a summary of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, a rack doesn't really have a big impact
Okay,
on energy consumption. If you build your own model from scratch, that has a huge
okay,
energy consumption impact. If you use, as a company, and you use an existing model, uh, the model has already been built. Yeah. So what the consumption that you and the cost that you incur is if your employees make specific queries or prompts. Yeah, that goes with tokens, and they have a cost and they have an energy cost. Now, if you use it for any question you had, also for the ones that you usually did with just a search engine, so a search engine is much cheaper in terms of energy and in terms of costs. Yeah. You can do the same with Gen AI, and as an assembly, maybe you don't see the cost, but there is a cost. So you can be much more responsible at using this technology for what it is good for.
Richard, I'm sad to say we've completely run out of time, but thank you. Look forward to speaking to you at a future event to follow up on some of these huge and important topics. Thank you very much indeed.